Hello, everybody, and welcome to Baseball Behind Barbed Wire, and welcome to Tadaima. My name is Bill Staples, and today we are going to celebrate the legacy of Japanese American baseball. A little bit about myself. I am a baseball historian, and I'm also a member of the Nisei Baseball Research Project. That's a nonprofit organization founded by Kirio Nakagawa in Fresno, California, and the purpose is to preserve and share the history of Japanese American baseball. I'm also a board member of the Japanese American Citizens League here in Arizona. I live in Chandler, Arizona. And I'm also the author of Kenichi Zenimura, Japanese American baseball pioneer. It is the biography of Zenimura, who's considered the father of Japanese American baseball. In addition, I'm also published a book this past year called Gentle Black Giants, A History of Negro Leaguers in Japan. And it's actually what I would consider a part two of the Zenimura story, in that he had a lot of interaction and influence with Negro League ball players and encouraged them to tour Japan in the 1920s, which led to more tours in the 1930s and laid the foundation for professional baseball in 1936 over in Japan. But today I'm going to talk about baseball at Gila River here in Arizona. And this is a photograph from Gila River of Zenimura Field, probably about 1943. This was taken by one of the ball players from Hart Mountain, who snuck a camera into the camps and took this photograph. And it was colorized by the Nisei Baseball Research Project. On deck is Tetsu Furukawa, who you'll meet later in one of the videos that we'll share. And batting is Kenichi Zenimura, the youngest son of Kenichi Zenimura. All right. So the outline for today's presentation, I'm going to give a little background about the importance and history of baseball in Japanese American history, talk about pre-war, during the war, after the war, the legacy, how I believe that you can still see the influence in today's game, and then resources on where to go for more information. All right. Okay, so let's start with the background. And I think it's really cool that Tadaima means I'm home, because I like to say that all great stories in baseball begin at home with home plate. And that's kind of where my story starts that I want to share with you today. Okay, so a little context about me and myself and how I learned about Zenimura Field and Zenimura's history. So I live in Chandler, Arizona, which is about 15, 20 miles south of Phoenix. So you can see on this map, there's Chase Field, my home in Chandler. And then south of me is Gila River. So I moved to Chandler in about 2004, and I'm a youth baseball coach, and I wanted to explore coaching opportunities at Gila River. And so I went to Google, did a Google search for Gila River and baseball, didn't find anything about coaching opportunities, but I found this. This is Baseball as America. This is a traveling exhibit, and part of the exhibit was this homemade wooden home plate from Zenimura Field, designed by Kenichi Zenimura from the Gila River Relocation Center, Arizona, in 1943. And this was an artifact on loan from the Japanese American Citizens League, the Midori Hall family, Masa Noshita, who is the caretaker of the home plate, and the Nisei Baseball Research Project. I point all of this out because I knew nothing about this history prior to doing this Google search, and it changed my life. So again, a little bit more context. Remember the time that I talked about. This was 2004. It's just a few years after 9/11, and I could see that our nation was changing in that the way that we were treating Muslim Americans because of the differences and of course what happened with 9/11. And I was really concerned about the way that our nation was treating those who looked like the enemy. And it reminded me of this history here. And I thought that there would be some great wisdom and lessons to be learned, and that this history shouldn't be lost and it needed to be shared. So this was my attempt to keep this history alive, and also for me personally, to learn some wisdom and lessons learned that I could share with others. All right. So pre-war. So this is Kenichi Zenimura from October 1927. This was a few weeks after the New York Yankees have won the World Series. Babe Ruth and Lou Gehrig barnstormed the West Coast. They went up and down the coast, and they stopped in Fresno. And in Fresno, they were asked, or they asked the local community to bring the best semi-pro players out to the ballpark and to play a game. So Zenimura picked three other players: Johnny Nakagawa, Fred Yoshikawa, catcher, and Harvey Iwata, center fielder. And these four great Japanese-American ball players joined Lou Gehrig's team, and they beat the Boston Babes, Babe Ruth's team, 13-3. And from that, Babe Ruth and Zenimura that evening at a dinner started talking about Babe Ruth potentially touring Japan. And almost immediately, Zenimura started writing letters to all of his contacts over in Japan to lay that foundation for Babe Ruth to tour. It took about 7 years for him to eventually get there, but Babe Ruth did go, and so Zenimura played a key role in planting that seed to get him there. So Zenimura is considered the father of Japanese-American baseball because of his career as a player, a coach, and international ambassador. As I mentioned, he encouraged Negro League ball players to tour Japan in the 1920s. It was actually 1927. And then Babe Ruth toured in 1934. There appears to be a popular opinion that baseball over in Japan started right after or because of Babe Ruth's tour in 1934. But I want to provide a little bit more context. That's not entirely true. It is true that the league started in 1936, a few years after Babe Ruth, but the foundation for that started long before Babe Ruth ever stepped foot in Japan. So with the Nisei Baseball Research Project, we identified that between 1905 and 1940, there was almost 100 tours going back and forth between the US and Japan. We call this the baseball bridge to the Pacific. And it's important to see that there are multiple architects who helped construct this bridge. You see that almost 30% of the tours were arranged by Nisei leagues or participated by Nisei teams. Then you had Japanese teams coming to the US, colleges and universities going to Japan. Negro League teams had about 5 tours, semi-pro teams, and then the Major League All-Stars had 9 tours total, so less than 10%. So you can see that the majority of the efforts to export the American style of baseball to Japan really was the Nisei players and the Japanese players themselves coming to the US. So before the war, baseball was huge in the Japanese American community. There's a famous quote that says, "Putting on a baseball uniform was like putting on the American flag." And for the Japanese American community, especially the Issei, who were not allowed to become US citizens, baseball was a great way that they could kind of demonstrate their place in society through the great game of baseball. It's a great meritocracy, if you will, in that it didn't matter what your background was. If you could step on the field and compete and play, you gain the respect of your peers in your community. And that's exactly what Zenimura did with baseball as well. But life changed, as we all know, for the Japanese American community on the West Coast on December 7th, 1941. And with that, at the time, Zenimura, he was actually an auto dealer. He owned a Studebaker dealership, partnership with a gentleman in Fresno. He had to sell his business, and his family was sent to the Fresno Assembly Center. Most of the Japanese Americans in Fresno were relocated to Arkansas in either Jerome or Roar. But Mrs. Zenimura, Kyoko Zenimura, had, my understanding was either tuberculosis or asthma. And so for medical reasons, the family was sent to Gila River in Arizona for the dry climate. So a little context in terms of the population in Arizona and also comparing to the other camps. So overnight, Poston and Gila River, the 2 camps in Arizona, became the 3rd and 4th largest cities in Arizona behind Phoenix and Tucson, and they are the 2nd and 3rd largest camps overall during World War II. So you see almost 30,000 Japanese Americans were sent to Arizona. So the Zenimura family actually consisted of 5 people. So Mother Kyoko, Kenichi, actually Kenichiro. And actually when he grew up, his American name or English name was Jacob, growing up in Hawaii. Not many people know that, so it's kind of interesting. So he's 43 years old in this photograph here. So his oldest son is Kenji, who's not in the picture at all, literally and figuratively. He's living in Japan at the time with Zenimura's grandparents, or Zenimura's parents. So he graduates from school over in Japan, and he's fighting for the Japanese army. I believe he's in the Navy. So Kenso is 16 years old, and Kenshi is 15. So I don't speak Japanese, but I know that basic numbers, ichi, ni, san, shi. The joke in the Zenimura family was that Kenichi, or Ken, wanted to have 9 sons. You can see the first Ken, second Ken, third Ken, fourth Ken. He wanted 9 sons so that he could have a Zenimura baseball team. Obviously, that never happened as well, but I think it's just a joke. Anyway, so Zenimura got the idea in about December of 1942, I believe. So one cold night in the desert to build his 3rd field. He had built 2 before, one in Fresno, the Japanese ballpark, in 1925, and then another one at the Fresno Assembly Center in 1942 when they were first relocated. And it was a community effort. First started with Zenimura and his sons starting to pull weeds and really take the effort and initiative to construct that field, which was just outside of the barbed wire. So it's kind of interesting that they would allow them to build the field just outside the barbed wire fence. But you have to remember that the Butte camp, in addition to the canal camp at Gila River, were located miles and miles away from any major roads. So they really weren't going to be going anywhere. And there was really no risk of the Japanese Americans leaving without authorization. So that's why they allowed them to build the field outside of the barbed wire. So again, here's that photograph that we shared earlier. You can see that there are stands for probably about, I heard, up to about 3,000 individuals who could sit. Zenimura actually put numbers on the seat as well. People had reserved seating, and you had to pay more to get a better seat. But I think it was up to maybe 7,000 individuals who could attend and watch the ball game. So Zenimura Field opened on March 7th with a doubleheader, 1943. And you can see that camp director Bennett threw out the first pitch. So the officials there at the camp really embraced baseball, knowing that it would bring a better sense of community for everyone involved. And as George Omachi famously said, it was demeaning and humiliating to be incarcerated in your own country, and without baseball, camp life would have been miserable. So the field at Gila River, it was not the only baseball field throughout the 10 camps, but it was considered probably the finest field in terms of being more of a complete stadium with a backstop, dugouts, and the seating, if you will, the bleachers. So this is artwork from 1943 promoting one of the games at the camp. It's actually really a beautiful piece, and it's translated to. So a big baseball game, Sunday, September 26th, 1943, 5:30 p.m., the 3-year Arizona State champions, the Phoenix American team, versus the Butte Camp All-Stars at Block 28 baseball field. So Block 28 is Zenimura Field, and this Phoenix American team is actually the Phoenix Thunderbirds, and they were the state champions for several years prior to coming into the camp. It's interesting, Zenimura would receive copies of the Arizona Republic newspaper, and he would read about these great semi-pro teams in the outside area and invite them in to play. So that's how this game came about. Another team that he invited into the camp was the all African-American team, the Arizona Compress Ball Club. They were the state champions in 1940. And several of these ball players, not the complete team, but many of them came into the camp and in 1943, played against the Butte All-Stars behind barbed wire. So we have some great ball players here. Cornell Fisher, who's in the Arizona Softball Hall of Fame here, and Leon Westbrooks. He was a center fielder, had a great style and flair to his game, kind of like Rickey Henderson, if you know him, a modern day player, or at least from the 80s. Let's see. This game itself, it's interesting because Zenimura, when he invited a team to come in and play, he would grant them or give them the majority of the gate receipts. So I believe they received 70% win or lose coming into play. And so this is a really, I think, a heartwarming story as well, because you have this African-American team coming into the behind barbed wire, the incarceration camp, understanding the situation. And instead of playing a highly competitive game, they brought a kind of a fun entertainment style, if you will, almost like the Harlem Globetrotters. Played a lot of shadow ball, throwing the ball behind their back, catching the ball behind their back. Just really brought a sense of entertainment and fun. So you can see from the headline that the Butte All-Stars won 11-3, but it really wasn't about the score. It was about, I think, a sense of compassion and bringing joy into others' lives in this pretty dark chapter of U.S. history. In addition, I think it's also fascinating that this is probably the only time in U.S. history and baseball history where you have an all-black team going into competing against an all-Japanese-American team in the middle of an Indian reservation. I don't think that's ever happened before or since. All right. So another interesting chapter and game from Gila River occurred around the loyalty questionnaire. So a little context, there were two questions on the questionnaire. Question number one, are you willing to serve in the armed forces of the United States on combat duty wherever ordered? And question number two is, will you swear unqualified allegiance to the United States and forswear any form of allegiance or obedience to the Japanese emperor or any other foreign government, power, or organization? Now, this is a pretty complicated situation, especially for the Issei, who were not allowed to become U.S. citizens. So if they forswore their citizenship to Japan, they were individuals with no citizenship at all. And then for others who were willing to serve and fight wherever ordered, that meant that they may actually have to fight against brothers, cousins, and relatives who lived over in Japan, much like the Zenimura family. So with that, it created two divisions, if you will, the yes yeses and the no nos. And so anyone who answered no on the questionnaire, they were sent to the higher maximum security camp over in Tule Lake, as many of us know. So what Zenimura did was he formed a series, a parting series before those individuals left for Tule Lake. It was the yes yeses versus the no nos. So September 11th and 12th, Saturday and Sunday, Zenimura scheduled the best of 3 game series. There were 17 players on the yes yeses and 21 players on the no nos. And Zenimura himself, he answered yes to both questions, and he was the coach for the yes yeses. So game 1, the yes yeses won 5-4. Game 2, the no nos won 7-5. And game 3 wasn't played. They decided at the last minute. They said, all in all, the novel classic ended seemingly just right, being called with 1 win apiece. And so they canceled it. It's really fascinating. There's a gentleman down on this photograph here in the Guadalupe YMBA jersey, James Step Tomoka. He's in the back row. His family actually still has a baseball with the scores of these games preserved in their family archive. Really fascinating to see that history. But with that in mind, I'd like to share what Zenimura called the most thrilling chapter in the history of baseball or at Gila River. Okay, this is a wonderful video that was created back in 2006. This is a highlight of the Butte High Eagles versus the Tucson Badgers. They were the all-state high school baseball team from Tucson. And everyone calls it the game that made a difference. So with that, I will share the video.
I couldn't believe what I heard on the radio. And we thought we were invincible. And I thought nobody would ever attack us.
Japan wanted to reach out and grab an empire.
December 7th, 1941, a date which will live in infamy.
We heard over the radio about the incident of Pearl Harbor. You choked up.
The day following Pearl Harbor, President Franklin D. Roosevelt declared war on Japan. Almost overnight, a whole population's allegiance was shrouded in skepticism. Anti-Asian sentiments that had been simmering through years of racial segregation were now brought to a boil.
Didn't hardly know anything about Japan, and I really didn't think that we were enemies of the United States.
People would say things like the only good Jap is a dead Jap and things like that.
I had a lot of bitter feelings, like a lot of people, toward the Japanese.
We may look like Orientals, but deep inside we're American.
February of 1942, President Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, initiating the removal and relocation of 120,000 Japanese from Washington through California.
Read most broadly, it could apply to almost any Americans, but it was only implemented against Japanese Americans by ethnicity, not by citizenship.
If you're Oriental, they picked you up and they took you home and told the mother to pack one suitcase.
They put the handcuffs on him and took him away, not telling us where they were taking him or why.
Basically, like we're just being herded away like sheep.
10 internment camps were constructed, many in desolate regions of the country. One such camp was built roughly an hour west of Tucson at Gila River. You look around today, and all you'll find are rows of olive and orange trees, so it's kind of hard to imagine what it must have looked like 65 years ago when Japanese Americans were brought here and introduced to their new home. But instead of finding rows of olive trees, they instead found rows of barracks, a barren desert, and barbed wire.
I definitely felt like a prisoner.
It was a real trying time for the Japanese.
There arose a need for distractions from camp life.
We were all baseball nuts before the war. There was the one sport we could participate in.
It played an important part in our life because it gave us something to do.
One Hila resident whose passion for baseball saw no boundaries formed a competitive camp league. His name, Kenichi Zenimura.
Kenichi Zenimura was the father of Japanese American baseball.
He was there to play to win.
After his family was relocated to Gila River, Zenimura formed 3 divisions of 32 baseball teams.
They started to build this field of dreams, as you might call it.
Here were Americans keeping the all-American pastime alive, even inside of a concentration camp.
Zenimura enjoyed a challenge, and in 1945, he and his Butte High Eagles found their match, a high school team just east of camp considered the best in Arizona, the Tucson Badgers. By 45, Tucson High was a 2-time state champ on its way to a 52-game winning streak with a pitcher named Lowell Bailey who finished 1944 with a perfect 0.00 ERA.
We had been champions a couple of years before, and we anticipated that we were going to be state champions again.
The Badgers were led by Coach Hank Slagle, a former University of Arizona Wildcat and semi-pro leaguer.
He was very conscious of his position and the influence that he created on his kids.
Slagle's character would shine in mid-April when his dominant Badgers were to face a team made up of intern Japanese Americans behind barbed wire.
We knew that we were going to go up there and play in this internment camp.
And maybe there was, in the back of our mind, we want to make up for Pearl Harbor.
We had heard all this hype about them and etc. And when they came to camp, they were bigger than us.
I saw the fence. And I said, God, this is like a prison.
The very first or second inning, they proved themselves to be excellent. Fundamentally, that's when the doubt about who we were playing, it was all erased. We were in a ball game.
We tried to, play small ball and hit and run, steal bases.
Coach was saying, hey, you guys had better get off your duffs. These kids came here to play a ball game.
It was a back-and-forth battle that saw the Badgers take the lead 3 times, only for the Eagles to come back and tie. By the end of the 9th, the score was 10-10. The game went into extra innings.
There was some doubt that we were going to win that ball game.
In the bottom of the 10th, still tied at 10, bases loaded and 2 outs. The coach's son, Harvey Zenimura, came up to bat, hit a 3-2 pitch past the third baseman and into left field. Shosan Shimasaki took off from third base to home, the winning run. Final score, 11-10, Butte Eagles over the Tucson Badgers.
We just lost the game.
It was a great moment for them, but we couldn't believe it, what was happening.
It was just pandemonium there because we have beat the state champs of Arizona.
It was a game that most of us will never forget.
Perhaps even more significant than the game itself was what happened afterwards.
We took our shower, got our clothes on, and found out that we had been invited to stay.
Coach Zenimura, he thinks of everything, so he had ordered a truckload of watermelons.
After they ate, the Eagles invited the Badgers to participate in another kind of sport, sumo wrestling.
They dressed me up in all the sumo wrestling garb, and I went out there, and this kid that had played ball with us, he was grinning and laughing, and then he picked me up and stuck me.
I realized that these people were Americans, just like myself.
They were sincere to us. They were like just anybody else.
The more I thought about it, the more I thought, what a big mistake we made by putting these people in a relocation camp.
61 years later, with the help of the Nisei Baseball Research Project and the Pima County Sports Hall of Fame, the surviving members of both squads reunited for the first time since walking off the diamond.
It was different today. We weren't like on different sides of the team. We were one team.
We are part of history, and we just went out there to play a ball game.
Coming to Tucson on this occasion, I think is one of the biggest things that ever happened to me.
I'll remember it for the rest of my life.
These were two American teams playing each other. To see the humanity between Sligo and Zenimura, that's the magical part of this.
Those kids were doing their darndest, we were doing our darndest, and to me, as I recall, it was just one of those great games.
Despite everything that was going on in our nation, divided by war, they didn't let it get in the way of playing the great game of baseball.
Both teams were winners that day. This was what baseball was meant to be.
All right, great video. So that was me actually in the video itself. The comment about they didn't let the war get in the way of playing the great game of baseball. Unfortunately, they did a week later. So Slagle and Zenimura tried to have a rematch down in Tucson, and they had it scheduled. And then once the citizens of Tucson started to hear about it, they pushed back and said that they didn't want the Butte Eagles to come to town. They felt that they were a security threat, and they canceled the game. So very disappointed for Zenimura and Slagle. Zenimura wrote a letter to Slagle and said, among other things, he said, "I sincerely hope that we may meet again, not as a team perhaps, but as a single member of Uncle Sam and fight together for one principle." And Hank Slagle said, "I sincerely hope it won't be too long till we are all thinking straight again and can live together in the true democracy that we Americans of all races have created." So these are some beautiful letters that were written from Slagle to Zenimura and back. Just some context to know a little bit about Slagle himself. He was from the Phoenix area. He went to Phoenix Union High School, and he played baseball there in the late 30s. He was shortstop, and his second baseman was Bill Kajikawa. And Bill Kajikawa, the Japanese American, lived in the Phoenix area and went on to become one of the greatest athletes in our area, coach at Arizona State University, and a celebrated soldier, member of the 442nd. So Slagle did have a relationship with Kajikawa and the Japanese American community, and I think we see that that compassion and understanding reflected here in his interaction with Zenimura. So after the war, there was a lot of animosity towards Japanese Americans. And so for those ball players who wanted to continue their careers to play, many of them found opportunities over in Japan. So the two Zenimura sons, Harvey and Howard, or Kenichi and Kenso, they were among the first Americans to play for the Hiroshima Carp in 1953. It's been Mitsuyoshi, pitcher from Fresno as well. The three of them went and played. After, a couple years later, Fibber Hirayama, also from the Fresno area, played for the Carp. And then a great ball player from Hawaii, Wally Yonamine, would go on and play for the Tokyo Giants, or the Yomiuri Giants, later they were called, and he would become a baseball Hall of Famer as well. So the legacy of Zenimura and Japanese American baseball. So I do see a lot of parallels between Japanese Americans and African Americans in terms of using the game to break down barriers. So this was a message we created a few years ago with the Nisei Baseball Research Project. Similar struggle, different impact, equally important. Whereas African Americans integrated baseball, Japanese Americans internationalized it. And I think that's really the enduring legacy of Zenimura and the other Japanese American pioneers. They really did help build that bridge to the Pacific, but Zenimura is head and shoulders above all the others, in my opinion. And that's why he's worthy of the title, the father of Japanese American baseball. So unlike Jackie Robinson, whose number is retired in all of baseball, and you'll see number 42 in every ballpark, there is no recognition for the Japanese American pioneers. But what you will see is all these wonderful players coming over from Japan and really making a difference in Major League Baseball. So I believe that these individuals who are coming over to play are really indebted to those, the Japanese Americans who helped build that bridge to the Pacific. Now Zenimura himself, he's starting to get more recognition. His home plate is still at the Baseball Hall of Fame. It's now part of a permanent exhibit, and I believe they're going to be expanding that to include more of the story around World War II. And I am deeply honored and humbled to say that I am now the official caretaker of Zenimura's home plate. So I, on behalf of the Japanese American Citizens League and others who have a vested interest in the home plate, I keep track of it and monitor where it's going. Also had a good opportunity to go visit Japan, to meet with officials there to talk about Zenimura being recognized in the Japanese Baseball Hall of Fame. He was born in Hiroshima, and many of the individuals who he worked with are recognized already over in Japan, so it makes sense to have some recognition on that side as well. Zenimura's story is captured in the major motion picture American Pastime that came out in 2007. It's based on his story. As I mentioned earlier, my books are available, his biography and also his work with Negro League ball players and Gentle Black Giants. For younger readers, there's some wonderful books out there. Baseball Saved Us is the original classic. Barbed Wire Baseball came out a few years ago, and A Diamond in the Desert, which is the story of Chetz Furukawa. It's for the young adult reader, probably early teens, if you will. For anyone who might be visiting Arizona, we invite you to come to Nozomi Park. Nozomi is the Japanese word for hope, and this park was renamed to Nozomi in honor of the work that Zenimura did and the role that baseball played in giving the community a sense of hope during World War II. There's also a historical kiosk that you can read about the full story of the incarceration in Arizona at this ballpark as well. That's really important because this is a field that's used by a lot of young players. So it gives us an opportunity to educate them and to, during breaks during games and educating families who might be gathered around the ballpark as well. Also here in the city of Chandler, our Chandler Museum had a wonderful exhibit, Gaman, enduring Japanese American internment at Gila River. This exhibit ran for a few years. I believe it's going to be wrapping up soon. They did extend it with the COVID-19 pandemic. And just one comment about Gaman. I think it's really interesting. for me, the lessons that continue to be learned through the story of incarceration. And I find that the challenges of not being able to be free and live the life that we knew, Gaman really gives me a sense of hope, and that skill to endure the unbearable with dignity and patience. It's something that we're all trying to develop during this time as well. For anybody who would like to learn more, to ask any questions, feel free to email me at billstaplesjr@gmail.com. You can visit my blog at zenimura.com, or you can visit our website at niseibaseball.com as well for the Nisei Baseball Research Project. And with that, I want to thank you for taking time today to learn about baseball behind barbed wire and baseball at Gila River. All right. Thank you. And I hope that you continue to enjoy our community virtual pilgrimage with Tadaima. All right. Thank you.